ثم اضغطوا إلى زر العربية أغب.
Ramadan Mubarak. I am Jill Koyama. I am Professor and Vice Dean of the Division of Educational Leadership and Innovation at Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University in Phoenix, Arizona. I welcome you today. I encourage you to put any questions or comments that you have either in the chat or the designated question and answer area. Today, this is our third webcast in this webinar series, and today will be a more informal conversational session. We have two experts, Ruby Ghazal, the Vice Provost of International Affairs at Middle Tennessee State University, and Rangini Hamidi, most recently the former Ministry of Education in Afghanistan, and now my colleague at Arizona State University. The experts will just make some very general comments about themselves and their lives, but today will definitely be driven by your questions and anything you would like to ask any of us, the three of us, about being a leader and being a woman in leadership roles. Next slide.
Dr. Koyama, if we could pause for just a moment, I believe we're having some difficulty with translation.
Absolutely, and if you'd like me to go back and reintroduce, I can.
نعم أستاذ خيالي.
Looks like translation is working now. Is that correct? Yes, I see lots of yeses in the chat. So maybe if you want to just give an overview of the last few statements.
Absolutely. So today's webinar will be a conversation, an informal conversation, a question and answering, commenting with our two experts, Ruby Ghazal, the Vice Provost of International Affairs at Middle Tennessee State University, and Rangini Hamidi, who is my colleague in Thunderbird School at Arizona State University, and uniquely the former Ministry of Education in Afghanistan. I encourage you to put any comments or question in the Q&A and chat. And with that, let's proceed to introduce our experts. Rangina Hamidi was born in Kandahar, Afghanistan. In 1981, she emigrated to Pakistan and then to the USA in 1988 with her family. She holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia in Religious Studies and Women and Gender. Ms. Hamidi returned to Afghanistan in 2003 and took up residence in Kandahar. For 2 decades, she worked tirelessly to better the lives of Afghan citizens through development projects, advocacy, and most importantly, through education. Examples of Ms. Hamidi's accomplishments include the establishment of a full value chain model of an all-women social enterprise in Kandahar, whose products have now reached Europe, the Middle East, Americas, as well as other parts of the world. In this endeavor, Ms. Hamidi, Ms. Hamidi designed and implemented a holistic and full environment approach to bring value to Afghan women at each part of the value chain. Ms. Hamidi successfully led the Mesan International School to integrate and implement a world-class and internationally accredited curriculum with a solid foundation of Islamic education, Afghan history, Afghan values, and multilingual education. Most recently, Ms. Hamidi was Minister of Education of Afghanistan until August 15, 2021. Ms. Hamidi is well-versed in child development, educational psychology, educational management, Islamic pedagogy, and Islamic perspective. She is actually a rock star in academia. She has contributed to numerous publications and radio programs, including Times Asia Magazine, The Globe and Mail, Der Spiegel, Business Week, The Guardian, The Telegraph, National Public Radio, BBC, and Voice of America. Her latest publication is a book that she has co-authored entitled Embroidering Within Boundaries, Afghan Women Creating a Future. So welcome, Rangina. Would you like to say more just about your experiences?
Thank you and good morning to everybody. Assalamu alaikum, Ramadan Mubarak. It's an honor to be here. And just to add, you said a lot of things about me. I haven't done that much, it seems. But having the experience as a dual citizen of two worlds, both USA and Afghanistan, I have the privilege of looking at communities, particularly that of Afghanistan and the US, with a special lens, because I can fit in both cultures equally. And having that experience or that background gives me the perspective to be able to not only communicate, but better understand the values and the principles and the wishes and desires of both societies, which is an incredible asset in the educational path that I've now chosen, because I think it is incredibly important to not only be able to listen and understand the other, but also be willing to speak to the one who's listening to you to make each and other understand. So I'll just add that and look forward to an engaging conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd just like to introduce our next expert. With me, she needs no introduction. We've known each other for years and been colleagues. She is like family to me. Dr. Rahab, or Ruby Ghazal, is currently Associate Vice Provost of International Affairs at Middle Tennessee State University. She previously served as Director of Drexel's English Language Center in the College of Arts and Sciences, and then served as the Director of the Global Inclusion Office at Drexel University in Pennsylvania. As Director of the Global Inclusion Office, she taught courses in Women and Gender Studies, Middle Eastern Studies, Communication, and Academic Skills. Dr. Ghazal also previously held administrative positions at the educational nonprofit Ahmed East in Egypt, where she designed and managed a professional English training program and wrote more than 20 successful scholarship and grant proposals. Dr. Ghazal's research and work has promoted cultural understanding in educational settings, and for that she has received funding from Citigroup International, the American Embassy in Cairo, and the Boeing Company, among other funders. She received her PhD in Educational Administration from the State University of New York at Buffalo, and her MA in Teaching English as a Second Language from American University in Cairo, Egypt. In addition to her leadership positions, Dr. Ghazal has served as an instructor and advisor at the German University in Cairo, the American University in Cairo, Niagara University, and the State University of New York at Buffalo. Rahab, would you like to say more about your path and yourself? I think you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Assalamu alaikum, Ramadan Kareem, everyone. I actually feel humbled being in this session with Ms. Hamidi. You know, I am humbled at her accomplishment, and I wish in my path I could do a fraction of the work that she has done in Afghanistan. It's such an honor to be here. I feel privileged to be sitting here from my office in Tennessee, talking to everyone, because I have had multiple opportunities for growth with the help of great mentors, colleagues, and friends like Jill, who's my family friend, mentor, and colleague. I feel that I would not have been able to achieve what I have been able to achieve without the support of my family, the education I got, and the people I met along the path, and most importantly, my students that I worked with. I started, my first job was actually in sales, believe it or not. I was passionate about education, and I was selling educational toys for children to build their critical thinking, problem solving, and language skills. That was back in the 90s, early 90s. From there, working with the children, seeing the impact, I started teaching. Even as a college student, I taught fifth grade. I taught in a girls' school, and I realized that if you empower girls to think for themselves, and if you show them ways that they can grow and build confidence, there's no limits to where they can reach. My fifth grade students in that first school, and many schools, have gone to be university professors, directors and managers in corporations and universities in Egypt and all over the world. I am happy to talk about my journey, but I would be happier to answer any questions from you that can help you shape the future for women, girls, and young boys in our region in the Middle East. Thank you very much, Jill.
Thank you, Rahab. So as we wait for questions to come in, and again, please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A. I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask our experts. So part of the earlier part of these webinars, we talked more in general about gender equity or inequity and girls' education, primarily in the Middle East and North Africa. And you both have such experience and such varied experience over time. I'm wondering if you could speak to your thoughts about the education of girls or any gender-related issues in the lower grades.
Who first, me or Rahab?
You first, there.
Okay.
You.
Well, thank you. You know, Afghanistan, unfortunately, as the world news coverage shows, and we all now know, after the takeover of the Taliban, the biggest fear, even in the 3 years prior to the Taliban taking over the administration and collapsing the previous Afghan government, the number one fear from past experience of the Taliban regime running the country in the mid 1990s until 2001 was the actual fear that the Taliban will shut down educational opportunities for girls and limit and prohibit women from continuing to become public figures or work in the public sector as we were accustomed to and we got used to in the 20-year project period of Afghanistan trying democracy out. And as the women and activists had predicted, as soon as the Taliban took over, unfortunately, one of the quickest reform, if we may call it, that they brought to the society was to shut schools for girls ages 12 and beyond. So 7th to 12th grade education opportunity is at the moment on hold. According to them, they've not shut it down permanently, but again, from the experience of the past and just the conversations and the communication that we're hearing from the ground, it is very unlikely that they would allow girls to go to school. However, with one point that girls' education is being utilized as a leverage for political negotiations. So they want to use girls' education as a power of give and take when they're pushing the world to recognize them. So unfortunately, in our case, in the 21st century, there is a country called Afghanistan where we're actively banning girls from seeking education beyond 7th grade. And personally, I will share this with the audience, is I'm actually quite frustrated and a bit angry with the Muslim world for not, the Muslim political world, that is, for not calling out on this very incredibly painful decision or painful conversation that, not a conversation, but a decision that the Taliban have made. And unfortunately, our next door neighbor of Pakistan, instead of calling out on the Taliban that this is a bad thing to do, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan went publicly on a world stage and said, well, we can't really tackle or address traditional values. So he considered Taliban to be traditionalists who, are supposedly doing this banning of girls' education as a traditional value. And for that reason, he thought that, we cannot as a world force them or speak against them to say, why are they doing what they did? So it's very, very unfortunate. That's the current state of girls' education. But to quickly share, serving as Minister of Education in Afghanistan for exactly 14 months, one of the discoveries that and it was not really a discovery that should be made, everybody should have known this fact, is that a lot of the data that we did have at the ministry that was often, funded by international organizations such as USAID or, FCDO from UK or other donor agencies, including UN, United Nations, and UNESCO and UNICEF being two active partners of the ministry on the ground. Even in the past 20 years, the effort to include or make education accessible to more girls across the country, it was not a primary effort, even in the so-called democracy. So yes, we had far more numbers of girls attending and starting schools than we ever had in the history, but the graduation rates of girls from 12th grade would drop drastically. And that was the data that really not many of our partners, including the ministry itself, did not focus on. So education continues to be it was and continues to be a very political thing. It seemed, again, from our experience, we don't educate girls for the sake of looking at education as an opportunity, as a human right, as an equal opportunity to allow a gender, a community of people to be able to receive the same as boys. But we politicize it in one direction or another as we please in various factions that come to power. So that's what I feel like. And again, I welcome more questions around it.
Thank you, Gringina. There is a question around that. So someone has posted the question and you partially explained this, but if you'd like to expand on it, how can the girls' ban on education be explained? Is it due to religion or something else?
It used to be described as a religious ban in the 1990s. The world has changed, whether we like it or not. Interestingly enough, elements within the Taliban administration are against this decision, calling it out as a non-religious decision. From my perspective, there is absolutely no religion involved in banning girls from education. It is strictly political first, and then some elements of the culture, of course, speak to it, because these are old men who have been grown in a very specific cultural context, and the chances of their women being educated is probably slim to none. And so they use their own personal experience to then apply it to a whole nation of 40 million people who don't share that experience. And that's what, unfortunately, small, if I may call them a terrorist group, which they are so far in the world, a terrorist group mentality is. So I think in the end, it has nothing to do with Islam, but just utilizing their power to control a certain group of population, which is women and girls, because at the end of the day, ultimately the fear is that when you educate a woman, you open her mind, and an open mind will not accept the kind of brutality that a regime like the Taliban wants to implement.
Thank you. Indrahab?
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Egypt, which is a different context and maybe excuse me, closer to Morocco. In Egypt, our situation is a little different. The challenges center more around cultural norms rather than legislation and politics. In Egypt, education is mandatory till the age of 16, and it doesn't matter whether it's a boy or a girl. We have almost a 93 completion rate for females at the lower, at the elementary level or low primary completion rate 93, which is comparable to the male completion rates of 94. So at those early stages of education, both girls and boys receive their primary degrees equally. However, the issue in Egypt is more economic. So there's a great segregation and great differences between school districts with a school district in middle class neighborhood or lower class neighborhood, pretty much like the United States, even though the funding structure is very different. So the funding comes from the Ministry of Education, but families with a little bit more resources can provide much better education and much better educational opportunities and opportunities for social mobility for their children if they just send them to a private national school, a private language school, or what we call experimental school, which is like magnet schools here in the United States. The education system in of itself in Egypt is a little bit restricting because we are working on developing the pedagogy and the curriculum to promote critical thinking and problem solving. But when you have classrooms of 60 or 70 students at the elementary level and at the high school level, how much can the students really learn? And how much attention can the teacher really give to individual students for their own growth? Not to mention special education and students with needs. This is, in a sense, kind of, I won't say ignored, there's a lot more attention now, but it was heightened because of COVID and the global pandemic. In Egypt, women have had kind of a roller coaster ride with empowerment and social rights. They are still disadvantaged when it comes to legal rights. It's still a patriarchal society. Still, the role of women is primarily considered to be a mother and a wife. However, in areas like healthcare, education, and even sometimes tourism and services, you're finding more and more women in leadership roles. Education is the #1 factor in upward social mobility in Egypt. And there are many programs funded by the USAID like this one, and even private corporations and companies in Egypt that are promoting women and girls education and professional skills for people with lesser opportunities. I was involved in a number of those initiatives. For example, the English Access Micro Scholarship that is funded by the United States, and I believe is also running in Morocco. And in the English Access Micro Scholarship, the target is 13 to 15-year-old young men and women who would receive cultural training, language training, computer skills training. And also the teachers teaching in the ministries of education would also receive teacher training on curriculum design, pedagogic methodology, and learning development. So there are opportunities there, but Egypt, we have 100 million. We have a population of 100 million. So no matter how much we pump into the system, the impact might not be showing quickly or clearly because of the dissemination. Yeah, and as for the question that was raised in relation to religion, and that might be an unpopular opinion. I believe that religious institution have been used to reinforce political empowerment of the leadership who happen to be males. So whenever and we can look at I'm looking personally at the history of Egypt, the Islamic history of Egypt. Whenever a new dynasty came along, the one factor that we're trying to do was to control the population, and controlling the population happens through controlling the mothers and the girls. So because you're reinforcing ideologies like you have to follow the leader, you have to follow the imam, you have to follow the sheikh, you have to follow the priest. And in Egypt, it doesn't matter whether you're Muslim or Christian. It's the same for both religions. So I don't think it's unique to Islam or unique to a particular religion. I think it is just the use, or rather abuse, of religious belief and our spirituality to achieve political goals.
Thank you so much. And I want to apologize for my moving around and perhaps people behind me. I am at a conference, so I am in a hotel lobby. I hope that is not too distracting. So I thank both of you for your responses. And there is a follow-up that you just started to address, Rahab. So if you want to add anything to this important question, how can we separate what is religious, cultural, and political? How can we untangle those?
I think it's very hard to entangle them. We're human beings, and part of being human beings, the intersectionality. We think, sitting here, I'm here sitting as in my role as Associate Vice Provost, but at the same time, I'm a wife, I am an aunt, I'm a Muslim woman in the United States, in a foreign country. I'm an international student. I was an international student. I'm an immigrant. So when you think of the complexity of our own identities, let's think of a larger scale. The society, we cannot separate easily between culture, religion, and politics, unfortunately. The only thing we can do is we focus on education and teach people how to understand the complexities, teach people how to work within the complexities and try to entangle them themselves. What does it mean for me to be a Muslim? And I don't mean to point at anything, but when people look at me on the street, they don't necessarily recognize me as a Muslim woman because I don't cover. But does that change my identity as a Muslim woman? I don't think so. I feel that I lead my life as a Muslim woman. I follow what I think would bring me closer to God. Does that mean that I disregard the faiths of other people? Absolutely not. I think religion is very personal. And once we start crossing the line and trying to establish, and this happened in Egypt in 2011, establish an Islamic country or a Christian country or any kind of religious-based country, we are taking away from people who might not identify with that religion. And we're taking away from a general understanding that we're all human beings, regardless of what religion we follow or what spiritual path, because you don't have to follow a religion to be a contributing and loving member of a community. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer, but I always believe that education is the answer for everything. We raise awareness, we build understanding, we educate the people, and we educate the young generation, hoping that they can be the seeds for more understanding.
Thank you, Rahab. That was a beautiful answer, and I totally agree with you. I would like to share my personal experience and journey in this issue around religious identity, education, a Muslim woman. You know, I actually grew up in the United States, and I went to school, to university here in the United States. And I actually adopted wearing the hijab in my third year, the summer between my second year and third year, in an American university where we had 30,000 students, and I believe there were only 1 or 2 young women at the time wearing the hijab. It's become a lot more practicing now than it did in the 1990s. But to be honest, I personally chose the hijab not necessarily initially as a religious act. I chose it as a political statement to prove, because the literature that I was reading in my women's studies department at that time always described the Muslim woman as a mute, immobile, uneducated, oppressed, controlled by her male, father, husband, son, brother figure. And in my life, growing up as an Afghan American in a very traditional conservative family, I did not see that narrative play in my life. And so I took a personal, strategic, kind of a political decision to say, you know what, I'm going to choose to look like a Muslim woman in America, in the American context, by wearing the hijab. And let's see how I do, because I want to prove everything that I'm reading about the identity of a Muslim woman to be false. Because as now that I'm physically looking like a Muslim woman when I walk on the streets, I agree with you, Rahab, that whether I wear a hijab or not a hijab does not make me any more religious than my sister who doesn't. I think it is personal choice, and I respect that for women. So, and I've been blessed to say that my experience has been an incredible journey, because the hijab has actually enabled me even more to speak more, to be, out there and make communities and people who are either interested or afraid of this religion speak, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings and share similar values across principles around life. And I happen to choose to cover myself, and there's nothing wrong with that. So that's been incredible. But going back to Afghanistan's context, unlike the context of Egypt, or not unlike, kind of different, Afghanistan has always taken pride in the fact that it is a Muslim nation, and Islam has always been part of the identity, whether we publicly talked about it or not. But in the past 45 years, since the initial invasion of Russia that started in 1979, the aggression that was made, historically, we know that America and its allies have funded this fundamentalist group, initially called the Mujahideen, that then turned to Taliban, and that's that journey still continues. They used religion as the base for fighting against infidels. I mean, that's really the only and the basic rhetoric against Russian invasion, is that you arouse people's emotions religiously to fight the political Cold War that America was fighting, right? So unfortunately, we fought the war for 10 years. And with American money, we empowered the Mujahideen in our neighboring country, Pakistan, to fight against the Russians. Now, 10 years after the fight, millions of people killed, and extra millions of people sent to diasporas across the globe now, who became refugees. Ultimately, the Mujahideen won in 1989. And then they started fighting with each other as a civil war for another 4 or 5 years, killing millions of other people. And the interesting dilemma or the conversation is, if you do believe and accept that these Mujahideen fought against the Russian invasion, against the infidels, and that was considered a jihad, okay, I can accept for a minute that they fought the jihad. But the 4 years after 1989, when they killed each other as Muslims, what component of that can we call a jihad? So the debate or the academic debate simply doesn't exist when you address notions as such, because ultimately it became fight for power, fight for the seat that they couldn't agree with. And the best tool to use by all of these groups is education and women's empowerment. I was in 3rd grade as a refugee kid growing up in Pakistan in the early 1980s, I believe, or mid 1980s. And my father was lucky enough to get a warning from the Mujahideen at that time, which are the predecessors of the Taliban, to pull his daughters out of school. Now, a refugee man growing up or trying to live a life in a neighboring country, which is not his own, he doesn't speak the language, he doesn't know the system, but he's a refugee man. He believed in his daughter's education because there were 5 of us. And as a Pashtun Afghan man, he had no issue with us being educated, but the political elements that were being trained and supported at that time obviously sought and thought that education for girls was a problem. And so when I say we were lucky that we got a warning and not acid thrown on our face, which was a very, very common practice. And many of our family friends' daughters suffered that. So I was actually pulled out of school in grade 3 in our neighboring Pakistan because the Mujahideen did not think it was appropriate for girls to go to school. Now, luckily, we ended up coming to America, and I studied religious studies and women's studies in my university and decided to go back to Afghanistan. When I became minister, it's a very interesting story. One of the reforms that I actually sought to bring, which became very, very problematic very quickly, was I witnessed that about 12 years before my appointment, so in the late 2008 and 2009, the Ministry of Education had made a political move to separate Islamic education from modern education. They call it general education. And creating a separate entity that only looked at Islamic education further divided the nation in these 2 tracks of options that you could pick, either take a modern education route or a religious education route to get the same degree. Ultimately, you get the same certificate, 12th grade education. But why it was created, I quickly learned that it was, the men who were leading the ministry at that time had done this as a political move because the person who was leading the general education deputy seat had become too powerful and the minister hated him. And so he had divided his powers by creating this entity called Islamic education. And what we have officially done as a nation, policy-wise, is tell people that you have 2 paths, one religious and one non-religious, when in fact, even our general education, 30% of the curriculum involved religious education. So idiotic moves like that, which are based on politics, our children end up paying the price, because what that created is a kid getting a certificate from a general school, a modern school, started hating the guy or the girl coming out of madrasa, and vice versa. And so we further divided our community and our society across religious and political lines. And culturally speaking, a nation that calls itself the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, and you have your constitution beginning with the Sharia law is above any other law in the country, it did not make any sense to me as a leader in the position that I was, why there were 2 different tracks of education when we didn't have a secular education system in place in the first place. So it was just an assumption. And again, it could be to just fool the international community that we have 2 tracks, but in reality, that was not the case. And when I tried to merge these 2 tracks back together, the biggest attack that I got was from the religious leaders community, because they automatically stamped me as an infidel, because they saw it as a threat to attacking, religious education. So I share this experience with you to say that we're just not talking enough about what we're doing at the societal level, at the political level, at the cultural level, in these different communities and societies to really get the debate going. We love, as I don't speak on behalf of everybody, but at least in Afghanistan, it was very, very easy to just stamp people as infidel versus, Islam loving. And especially as a woman, when you're put in that leadership position, you get to carry the weight more because of the mere fact that you're a woman. But I think all societies need to really get engaged in tackling these hard questions and start addressing them from a academic point of view to be able to see, because we simply don't have these really critical discussions happening at the ground level, which are important. And part of I'll end with saying this, part of that hesitation to address these issues is the donor's policy of not wanting to fund, not wanting to support anything that has to do with religion, when in fact, most of the world's problems or issues or the politics revolve around religion. So I just don't see how strategic it is for the donor community to take out a very critical, important identity issue of Islam or religion, Christianity, Judaism. I mean, it can be any religion. It's not just particular to Muslims. But we need to reclaim the space where we need to talk about such critical issues to be able to address the critical problems that we all have across the globe. By simply covering it and shoving it under the rug, we're only perpetuating the cycle of violence, of problems and criticism, because we're simply not talking about issues that really matter.
Thank you. I believe that you have begun addressing a question, so I'll just state it, give a few comments, and then I want to, there's a bunch of comments coming in about Morocco that I'd like to put forth, and then there's a few questions attached to those comments. So the question that I believe that you've already started addressing is why only Islamic religion, right? What about other religions? And I would agree with you. So we can see that all over the globe, instances of xenophobia and racism that are integrated with religion in Myanmar, in India, and of course here in the United States as well. Let me read these two comments, and thank you for your comments. These are really quite detailed. So in Morocco, the problem for the girls is mainly related to the rural girls who are deprived of primary education and school wasting. If she, the rural girl, continues her education, she may not complete her academic path. Path in addition to the early marriage of underage girls. However, today's efforts are continuing the initial generalization, bringing education closer through university institutions and providing material support to encourage and combat waste. The restriction on the marriage of underage girls in terms of new legislation has improved the situation of rural girls, but our hope is to achieve equity and equal opportunities. How can you explain the better academic success of girls across countries? So hold that one in your thinking, and let me also read the next comment again about Morocco. Morocco has made important strides in assuming women in leadership positions in various fields by virtue of an effective governance policy. Again, speaking to policy, Rangina and Rahab, by virtue of an effective governance policy in political and economic management and administration, and it is openness to leading global experiences granted it leadership in political, administrative, and educational leadership. And our project does address Islamic education courses. That is from Tanya. So that's part of this project, that the webinar. So can we go back to the issue of the success or achievement of girls, perhaps in your own countries, here in the US, maybe not the same. And then someone is asking if there's any statistics that you could share about Afghanistan and Egypt. So that's a lot, but throw that out there. How do we account for the success of girls in education?
I can start if you don't mind, Rangina. So I'm looking at, I'll take the first part of rural issues. This issue has been studied multiple times, and I think it's not unique to Morocco. In many countries, the issue of access, particularly in rural areas, add to that early marriages. And in Egypt, we had, and I think in Afghanistan, it's close, girls getting married at a very early age. In Egypt, it was an issue of policy and legality. So there is a law in Egypt that forbids the marriage of girls before 16. So 16 is the minimum age. And I think most recently it was raised to 18. So you cannot marry off or get married if you're under 18. This doesn't mean that it is always applied, because again, when you're in rural areas and if you don't have an authentic birth certificate, there are some practices where they issue local certificates by the village head or the head of the village or the mayor of the village, saying that the girl is 16 while she's in fact 14 or 15. So there are some attempts there to enforce the law, but unless there's cultural understanding and building awareness with the families themselves. Now, why do girls get married at an early age? And I think this is the issue that we should focus on, rather than trying just to have a policy forbidding girls from getting early. Let's try to fix the problems that are leading parents to marry off their girls at 16. And most of these problems are economic in nature. Many of the families are in very poor areas. They don't have access to education. They don't have access to resources. The parents themselves are uneducated. They have too many children. So one girl being married, this is one less person to feed. So we cannot think of girls' marriage as independent of all those other factors. Now, why are the parents not educated? It's because in those rural areas, there are limited resources and there aren't even schools or qualified teachers to build those schools. One initiative that has proven success is the one classroom school, teaching multiple levels. So this is one successful model. I think the madrasa model in Afghanistan, taken out of any controversial issues, this idea of having one person teaching children, it was useful. If we think 600 years ago, 500 years ago, the madrasa created, one of the oldest universities in the world, if not the oldest university in the world, the Qarawin, as well as Harvard and Yale started in this kind of same idea of one instructor with students around. This is the main concept of madrasa. So if we start looking, we cannot impose, my opinion is that we cannot impose our urban ideas into rural areas. What works in cities and towns, whether in the United States, Cairo, Alexandria, Kabul, or Rabat, may not work in rural Middle Tennessee, or might not work in small villages in the Delta in Egypt. We have to think of the community as a whole and what is really the factors and the challenges contributing to the lack of education and ultimately also early marriages. I'll stop here. I addressed this part and then I'll give Randina a chance to talk and then we can address other parts.
Thank you, Rahab. I again love your last comment about the madrasa model, which I think is part of alluding to what I said earlier, that we need to reclaim the spaces of education globally. And the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, the oldest and the first university founded in the world is by a Moroccan woman, sitting in Morocco, and I don't know the exact location. That should be inspiration for all of us, for the world, to say that, there's something incredibly important, even in the Islamic world. And, as we learn and educate ourselves about education in the Islamic world. So it was there, it's just been politicized by men, unfortunately, to shut down the spaces of education and liberation. So just quickly, the better academic and success of girls, I wholeheartedly agree with my colleague Rahab, who mentioned the early marriage problem, which, yes, even in the context of Afghanistan, it is predominantly economic. In a society where poor families live and you have 8 or 9 children or more, one less mouth to feed is one less mouth to feed. And so you just marry off the girls as early as you can, because culturally that's the prescription of what you do with girls. They grow old and then you marry them off, whether it's at age 12, 16, 18, or 20. And for many families, when they have to make that decision to do it sooner than later, they would rather do it sooner to just ease off the financial strain on them. And the laws you also addressed, Afghanistan, at least in the previous administration, had laws that stated, no one can marry a girl. I think we changed it to 18 years age 18 as well. And we even added the notion that you can't force her to marry. But how much of that law is actually practiced in a country like Afghanistan, particularly in villages and the rural areas, that remains a question. So although I accept and appreciate efforts that work on the legal reforms of nations and societies, a legal reform on paper is only a legal reform on paper. Unless and until we start practicing it, it doesn't really mean much. And so for that, what I and my administration tried to do is recognizing and realizing the problems of girls not getting educated, particularly in rural areas. We actually sought to think outside of the box and create or start the discussion around creating alternative pathways to receiving an education. In the 21st century now, with technology advancement as we have it, it makes no sense to just limit ourselves as policymakers and administrators to just think of one stringent way as a path to education. And again, in a society like Afghanistan, where girls leaving their home is a big deal, particularly in the rural community. Schools are not available, meaning physical schools are not built near many of the villages. And so many families don't feel comfortable sending their girls, for a mile or two to go to school every day, for the fear of, sexual harassment or abuse, which are, universal problems that we all have. And so the online alternative education system could be an option. Afghanistan also interestingly created the community-based education model, where you don't have to have a school building to get educated. You send a teacher and the school materials, the books, the learning materials to a home of a village person, and then bring the girls from that village together to get educated. And it worked. It was good for grades 1 to 3, and we were considering expanding that to go as higher as grade 6 and beyond. So alternative pathways to completing an education, particularly for girls across the globe, is definitely one answer of how we can educate more girls. And then also encouraging and creating and designing programs for girls who get married early to still continue their education. There's no reason why a girl, once she's married, shouldn't be able to continue her education. And when I approached that topic as minister, some of my colleagues looked at me and said, but she's married. And of course, these are mostly men. And I said, so what if she's married? Her mind has not stopped working. So yes, she might be reproducing, and yes, she might be managing a home, of her in-laws, but she was doing that at home too, with her parents' home. So most girls end up doing house chores even in her mother's and father's home before marriage. Of course, there's added responsibility of her husband and potentially getting pregnant. But what is to say that we cannot be respective of women having multiple things to do and create a program to have her complete her education and maybe take longer. So again, I think we just need to be able to open our minds up in this idea of what is completing an education, the framework around it, the process around it, and maybe just completely taking out the time limit. It doesn't have to be completed in the 4-year regular school model as we know it. Second, the governance and policy issue. And again, I don't know if this can apply to other nations, but in the context of Afghanistan, what I've learned and discovered is that unfortunately, one of the things that is really missing in the education sector at the societal level, particularly as it comes down to rural areas, is that we don't have enough role models as female educated women who either remain in those rural communities or become really good role models to promote education as a non-threatening thing. What I've discovered and and many of my Afghan sisters will disagree with me with this, but I saw this problem as many of our Afghan women, once they become educated, they almost automatically separate themselves from the rest of the society. So an educated Afghan woman in the past 40 years at least sees herself as different, sees herself as no longer part of the general community, and she excludes herself to go to a bigger city and a better city, and then eventually outside of the country. And when we constantly have this brain drain, what local communities start seeing is that they see education as an exclusive privilege of some. And if they don't want to lose their daughters and their sisters, then they say, well, if education means you go and leave and you become something else, then I don't want that for you. And so many men use that actually to stop their girls or their women from seeking education because they see it as a threat. And I think we, as women leaders across the globe, if we really truly do believe in education, which we all do, obviously, we need to work on creating better and successful role models for girls in those communities to look up to, and really do start seeing that city life or city centers or, these big positions are not the only change makers of society. Perhaps a more grassroots approach to creating leadership, women educated leaders at the grassroots level is also something that needs to be considered. And I think it is all of our responsibilities to work on so that we can get more and more girls looking up to women who are educated and not see education as a threat in their life.
Thank you both for these really thoughtful responses. We're getting a lot of comments and questions in. So I want to bring back the voice of the participants and see what you have to think about this. I'm going to go back a bit. So you spoke a little bit about some alternatives to schooling, like it may not need to be in a building. Maybe that could help with rural education. So this comment goes to that. The situation of poor education for girls is exacerbated in rural areas where girls drop out of school. It is clear in light of the harsh mountainous rural environment and weak infrastructure. It is true that in Morocco, for example, attempts have been made to create attractiveness and attract girls in primary education, such as the Taysir program, Taysir, that encourages and provides financial support to families. To get the girls to go to school, it is necessary to create a more attractive school, eliminate poverty and precariousness, and create a conducive learning environment. That's one comment. I want to go back a bit earlier I want to go back to this comment, and then I'll pose a couple questions that have been interspersed in the comments. So Rangina, thank you for sharing your story with us. So powerful to reach what you are and now in these circumstances. That's a good example of perseverance and struggle to survive and engage in an educational context. Your father is a great man who managed to get you out of the claws of the illiteracy imposed. So again, yeah, I would agree. And here's the question that's attached to that I want to pose to both of you. So now, as successful women, what have you done, will you do, to change the situation of women and girls in your home country? And how can you empower them? You've both talked a little bit about that, but anything you'd like to add?
Regina, do you want to start? Okay. So thank you for the comments, and I've been trying to also follow up with the chat to have a look. What have we? I agree. I think both Regina and I and many people, even on this school, have been privileged to have parents that understand the value of education. I was raised in a family where both my parents went to college, and as a child, I didn't understand how important that was. I didn't understand how unique that was. I took it for granted with a very simplistic view of life. But now as an adult, looking at what they were able to achieve, and my mom, by the way, came from a small village of, at the time, a few thousand, but her father, even though he never had more than 6 years of formal education, my grandfather had only had a primary school education, understood the value and the importance of education, and sent all his children, boys and girls, 12 of them, to the nearby city for elementary, middle school, and high school. My mom was the first of her 6 sisters to go to college. She wanted to go to college. She asked my grandfather to go to college, and whether because he understood the importance or whether because my mom was his favorite, he allowed her to study, to move to a whole new city by herself and attend college. Now, this is the kind of privilege I'm talking about. Understanding is the biggest privilege. Opportunity is another privilege. We don't choose which family we're born into, but what we can do is try to provide similar opportunities to people. In my previous talk a few weeks ago, I talked a little bit about some of the interventions that can help girls' education. And we talk a lot about the challenges, but I do want to point out here for a minute that, in fact, globally and in the Middle East, the status of girl education is at a peak. More girls than ever worldwide are educated, and more girls than ever are having leadership roles, whether in the Middle East, North Africa, or the world in general. In Africa, actually, it's a 39% of women leadership compared to the rest of the world. So our African nation, African continent is way ahead compared to the rest of the world. Going back to the interventions and what we can do. So one of the things that I talked about, I divided them up, or research divided them up into interventions at the student level, at the teacher level, at the school level, and at the community level. So I have been more involved at the teacher level. So I've written many grants, and many of the grants that I wrote are targeting education and teacher training in my home country in Egypt and in the United States for teachers from other parts of the world. So teacher professional development has shown that it has a high impact on success of students, and particularly girls. Curriculum instruction and pedagogy, which again, I see that as in line with teacher training, school grants and technology, so fundraising, some of the things that we've done. So in addition to the grants, many of my expat friends here in the United States and we work on fundraising to support schools and communities back home and in the Middle East. I think as an individual, we should always tell ourselves that whatever small change we make is an important change. It doesn't matter whether my grant was for $5,000 or for $700,000. That's the maximum I was able to get awarded, and the minimum that I was able to get. It doesn't matter even if it's $100 or $10 that we are contributing to back and putting back into the economy and into our communities. The other thing I wanted to do is, and again, I come from a better understanding now as an academic and someone coming from a privileged society. I think many of us here come from the privileged middle class. As growing up, I was surrounded by family members and friends who had domestic help, for example. And I think domestic help is one of the toughest societal norms that we can break. But I think it's important for us when we are thinking of that we should not allow the help of young girls. In my country, unfortunately, in Egypt, till now, it was more prominent in the 90s and 80s to have girls at the age of 12, 13, and even 14 skipping school and going to homes to help with families. If this is something that is necessary, then the least we can do is to provide education for those girls that are here in our homes and to treat them fairly and humanely and not engage in child labor. I'm hopeful that this has gone down significantly in Egypt, and more people now are, hiring help, 16 and above. But we sometimes tend to live in a bubble that doesn't allow us to see outside of the bubble, and we compartmentalize. Okay, I'm providing my zakah or sadaqah or my charity work to support, or girls in orphanages, but my aunt here is hiring a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, and I'm silent about it. We have to think of that. There's so much that we can do, and part of what we can do is just speak up when we see that something is not right, or offer opportunities. If I cannot change the fact that this young girl is working in that home, then at least I can have some of my time dedicated to teaching her, basic math and basic literacy to help her be able to move forward. What have I done? I was always involved in actually career services and professional development for college students in public schools. So before leaving to the United States, I was part of an organization called Nahdat al-Mahrusa, or the uplifting of Mahrusa is another name we refer to Egypt as Mahrusa, or the protected. So I was part of that group that worked with young junior, sophomore, freshman, college students, first generation students, to give career advice and future advice. So this is some of the things I do. I continue to do that as part of Education USA. So whenever I am in Egypt or even here in the United States, I engage with Education USA and talk about leadership and education opportunities. There is so much to do, but whatever little we do, we hope that it reaches the right communities and it reaches girls, and it gives them hope that there is a path forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahab. That was actually very inspiring and eye-opening. I never thought of how you stated the situation of girls who do work as domestic helpers in a lot of the communities, and your experience brings to mind my own experience, not necessarily so much in Afghanistan, but in Pakistan growing up, and my aunts and family members who still live in Pakistan. Domestic help of young girls is a normal thing. And it is mostly from rural areas that girls get brought to work in these homes. And I know that my own aunt, who has 9 children, 6 of whom are daughters, all of them are educated, they've higher degrees, doctors, engineers, yet these poor girls working in their home, nobody questions the fact that they could be given that opportunity. So that's an important conversation, and one that I will definitely share, at least in my network of people. So thank you for that. Somebody, I think, asked, or maybe it was Jill, you spoke to the conducive learning environments, and what can we do to encourage girls and areas that rural areas that don't have the schools, that don't have the learning environments. I want to go back to the point I made earlier, is that I think we need to stop limiting ourselves with this notion of how do we define conducive learning environments. If it is the developed world's concept of a nice school that is cool in the summer, hot in the winter, comfortable chairs, desks, classrooms, quiet space. I mean, all of those are ideal. Obviously, I'm not trying to negate that. But I think we also need to be very realistic about contexts of countries, like Afghanistan, for example, or Morocco. I mean, I haven't been to Morocco, but I'm sure it's not, cities are probably developed, but the rural areas are probably not. Or even Egypt, I'm assuming that rural communities still don't have the kind of resources that cities have. And that's just unfortunately the reality of what we're dealing with. And the frustration I felt as minister was that for 20 years, when there was this opportunity to educate children, both boys and girls, many communities chose not to because there was no physical school available. And that's where I want us all to think outside of the box, that can we afford to wait for a nice, conducive school building to be built before we send our children to schools? And I know that inspiration-wise, I know this picture has been used, kids sitting under a shade of a tree somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and a teacher holding a blackboard, or putting a portable blackboard and teaching that child. If there is no other alternative, I don't see why we cannot continue that. I don't see why we have to wait for that perfect environment to occur, when in realities, again, we also know that financially speaking, the world is changing, attention span is changing. And again, I know this is a political thing, but we have to be realistic with our own societies and our own communities and our own infrastructures and our own budgets. When we don't have the resources to be able to create that perfect environment, I think we should not wait for that perfect environment to be created before we start educating our children. Because I think if we have the intrinsic motivation within us and instill those intrinsic motivations among our teachers, among our educators in the country, then the space should not be a limiting factor to educating children. I did answer the question about what can I do for Afghanistan. I am quite limited right now. Obviously, I'm not in the country, and obviously I'm not involved with the current regime. But several things that I am doing is indirectly talking with the Taliban. And this is something that I know people don't like, but I get accused of, oh, you're pro-Talib. No, I'm not pro-Talib. I know that the reality of my country is that the country is in the hands of the Taliban right now. And the Taliban did not come to this power without the international support. We have to be realistic. 3 years, the US was holding debates or conversations of peace talks in Doha with the Taliban that eventually led to them eventually coming and taking over our government. And so now that they are in power, by completely rejecting to talking to them, I think we're only allowing them to perpetuate their ugly decisions as we know it. And when the US decided to cut down their conversation with the Taliban after their decision on girls' education, which to an extent, yes, I agree with, because the Taliban need to see the repercussions for making such decisions. But by not talking to them, we're only perpetuating their decision-making power even more. So I think we have no choice but to continue talking to elements even like the Taliban, even if we don't want to. Second, figuring out ways to provide alternative education opportunities to girls, particularly in utilizing technology and digital platforms as learning opportunities for now and for the future. Who knows what the future might be. Another thing that I am personally involved in at a very low level is continuing communication with teachers, principals, students that I know personally, to continue to inspire and encourage them to not give up. I think that's something that does lack in the global South, in the developing world, when we hear communities or we talk to communities, they give up hope quite easily because of, obviously, for the political changes and shifts that come. I don't blame them, but I think there needs to be active effort to continue to say, things will get better. Let's just hope for the best, because that's the only thing we have right now, unfortunately, as women. And finally, I will be going back. I just don't know when the opportunity presents itself. I think it's important, as I spoke to, it is important to have role models in the community, in the country. And yes, there's a lot we can do outside, but there's a lot more we can do when inside. And finally, I just do also want to raise a question to the audience and to my colleagues in this panel. Is there's a lot of talk about educating the girls, and that's important, obviously, and we're all doing that and we're all promoting that. But the interesting question of the comment made about my father being a hero, or being an incredible man because of raising me, or Rahab also alluding to her grandfather and father. It's interesting that most women in the world often find a male, father figure, grandfather figure who supported them in their journey for education. I do want to throw this question out that while it's important to talk about continuing girls' education and supporting girls' education, we cannot forget our boys either. When I was Minister of Education, 60% of the ministry's students were boys. And that number probably is even bigger right now today, because more and more girls are getting out of school. In patriarchal societies, unfortunately, like Afghanistan, for many more years to come, boys will be decision makers, whether we like it or not. That's the realistic, unfortunate fact. And so I want to also think of how can we raise more boys like my father, like Rahab's father, like, all those wonderful fathers who don't see their daughters being educated as a threat. And I think that's an important element to remember, is that let's not use the men in our societies as enemies only, but as partners, equal partners, supporters. I had a wonderful father who helped me in the journey until he was alive and until I became an adult. And then I married a man who also believes in, who has absolutely no problem with his wife being a working woman, a feminist, a mother who has a daughter. He's a father to a daughter, and he has absolutely no problem seeing his little girl grow up to be a strong woman. So I think that that's also an important conversation, and an important point to point to, is that let's also focus on the men who are our partners in the struggle in the world, and that not all men are enemies of women's education throughout the world.
Thank you so much. And you've both mentioned that, the importance of men and women and girls and boys working together. We only have 10 minutes left. So I want to first just remind our participants that in order to get your certificate, you'll want to fill out the survey. The survey will be dropped shortly here in the chat. And then I want to put two questions together for the rest of our time. So you've talked a lot about cultural and ideological constraints and limitations, but also some hopefulness. These two questions are looking at limitations and challenges from two different aspects. One says, do you agree that sometimes the curricula itself may be an obstacle to a girl's access to leadership positions, especially when traditional curricula do not focus on problem-solving skills, negotiation skills, the ability to communicate, take initiative, and conflict management skills? So hold that question. And I want to couple it with this other one that goes back again to politics. And this person asks, do you agree that the political dimension is basically who sets the rules of balance or no balance, for that matter, with politics and culture and education? So both these questions are speaking to what these participants see as different limitations, different challenges. So in the last 8 minutes that we have, I'm wondering if you could speak to that, those two perspectives, or anything else that you'd like to say. I will let you know when we have 1 minute left, just so that we can close.
Do you want, I'll go to Rahab if you don't mind, since you didn't. The curriculum point or comment is relevant and it's important. Yes, we do. And this is for all nations, all countries, even the US. My daughter is in school right now in 6th grade, and some of the curriculum content that she brings home, I'm questioning it, even whether it's necessarily irrelevant to the new world that we're all creating or are part of. So curriculum reform is a must, and it needs to be an ongoing effort. I think just as societies develop and change, we need to make our curriculums relevant to the times that we live in. And unless we do that, we're going to have, I'll give you a quick example of, in our curriculum of a trash can model that my colleague called it in the past 20 years, there was a whole lesson created on the traffic light, the red, yellow, and green light. Afghanistan, even in the biggest city of Kabul, we had limited traffic lights, maybe 1 or 2 spots towards the end of the 20-year period. And then to have a lesson on traffic lights that don't exist in a country, and in a country where there were not even roads, I just questioned the relevancy of having that, content information, let alone the skills. So it's important to make curriculums relevant to the context in which we're educating the children for that society, so that we prepare children to understand and work in those particular societies. And then politics as limitations, unfortunately, this is across the globe. We all know it. The job of politics is to limit people and progress, unfortunately. However, I do pose something different that, and this is particularly important to women's leadership. When women take political leadership positions, they do see the world differently, through a different lens. And I think our way of changing the political pathway, particularly in areas like education, which is a service to its population and its children, I think we need to start redefining the roles of politics. One of the reasons that I was hated as a political figure in Afghanistan is because I refused to please the political leaders of my country, and instead focused on the children. And if a policy benefited the children, then I went ahead with that policy. But if the policy meant that it was pleasing the parliamentarians or religious leaders or tribal leaders, then I swayed away from it. And I think that's the type of leadership in the 21st century political world that we need to be engaged in more and more, to promote people in positions where they want to redefine politics through a different lens, and not the traditional lens of dirty politics as we know it.
Thank you, Ranjina. Inspiring too, very much. Your experience is very inspiring. I just put a little something. She's my personal hero in the chat. Bell Hooks, who we, and Jill knows we lost her this year, may she rest in peace. She says in her book, Educating to Liberate, and why am I blanking on the name of the book? But the quote is
Teaching to transgress.
Yeah, teaching to transgress. Thank you. The classroom can be a source of constraint or liberation depending on the pedagogy. I know we don't have a lot of time. However, I'm going to give a personal experience, something that 20 years ago I used to teach in a program called the Future Generation Foundation. This Future Generation Foundation was funded by Gamal Mubarak, who was the son of the late Egyptian president, ousted President Hosni Mubarak. Now, Gamal Mubarak forced and twist-armed many of the businessmen in Egypt to pump funds into this foundation. And then the foundation trained college graduates from underserved areas and with limited resources. So it was based primarily on need, not on, and sometimes on merit, but mostly on need. So any students who were not exposed to a language, could not speak the language, did not have access to computers. Back in 2000, all the way to 2010 or 11, this foundation funded almost 2,000 students every year. And my student, when I started teaching there, came to me and said, "Who do you think you are? You're a Muslim dressed like this. You think you know better than we are. You're being funded by the American government and you're trying to brainwash us." And I said to him, I'm not going to argue your logic. You are in this program. My advice to you is to take advantage. What I'm trying to teach you is to critically look at all the opportunities. You can benefit, you can boycott this initiative and lose, or you can be part of it and then learn how to critically analyze the situation and make a change from within. And this is how I see things. We in the classroom, no matter what the policies are, no matter what we as teachers, we have control in our classroom. We can make a change. We have a curriculum that is restricting, but I can make it more inclusive. And I know you don't like this, and more interesting. The girls in my research in 2013 were all products of the restrictive system in Egypt, but they found ways, and I wish you could see some of our presentation last time. Maybe we can share it with the group.
But 1 minute.
Yeah, so they were able to play the system and they were able to make changes. This is all I want to say. We can be the change. We can make that change happen. Thank you.
Thank you. One more reminder, there is a link to the survey that now works in the chat. Please take that to get your certificate. I want to extend my biggest thanks to Tanya, Nadia, and Rashid working behind the scenes to make all of these webinars happen. And I have to really just give an applause and a virtual hug to Rangina and Rahab, whose first names I use because I feel a closeness to them as kindred spirits in this work that we're doing. I want to thank all of you participants in Morocco for joining us, for sharing your ideas, for sharing your knowledge, and for joining in what I know will be a longer conversation. So on behalf of this webinar panel, I say thank you and have a good evening and breaking the fast.
Do we not want to leave? Thank you very much. Have a great
Thank you.
day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you.
And always thank you, Rashid.